All right, I wrote a very short poem for you. Did the New Orleans Saints act too fast on Derek Carr and therefore miss their chance on Lamar Jackson? We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always. Make a Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. In today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more with FanDuel. And you can check them out today by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Tell you more about them later, but on today's episode, I have two, count them, 1, 2, can't miss NFL draft prospects and combine standouts that would be perfect fits for the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr. We'll break both of those down. But first, did the New Orleans Saints jump too early for Derek Carr, thereby missing their opportunity to take advantage of this non-exclusive tag that was placed on Lamar Jackson by the Baltimore Ravens? No. Let's go through the several reasons why. The first of which, very simple. Very, very simple. The New Orleans Saints wanted Derek Carr. They wanted him from the very beginning of this offseason. He was their guy. And if you listen to David Carr on a podcast, Derek Carr's brother, one of the things that he mentioned was that Derek Carr was just let go by a team that didn't want him. So what was his number one priority out on the market? Going somewhere where he was wanted. And he was absolutely wanted here in New Orleans by the New Orleans Saints. Dennis Allen drafted him in 2014, chose to start him as a rookie, all of those things. And the New Orleans Saints, without a doubt, wanted Derek Carr. You look at the New York Jets, who are considered sort of the top competitors, if you will, were out there flaunting and saying, yeah, we had a great time with Derek Carr. We think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, but we ain't finna sign him yet. We're waiting to see what's going on with Aaron Rodgers. Okay, so then you didn't really want Derek Carr. Carolina Panthers are in the mix as well, but Carolina Panthers also have a top 10 pick in this year's draft. Could very well turn around and draft a quarterback. Will Levis, they could trade up, maybe grab a guy like Anthony Richardson, trade up grab a guy like CJ Stroud. I don't think they'd be able to get to the number one overall selection in order to grab Bryce Young, but you invest that pick or trade up and invest more picks in a quarterback. They don't want Derek Carr in that case. So why would Derek Carr waste his time? Or at least that's a display that they don't want Derek Carr. The New Orleans Saints wanted Derek Carr. They went, they got him, they got it done. It was also evidenced by the fact that the New Orleans Saints were the one and only and singular and individual, the only one that took the time to visit with Derek Carr, and that Derek Carr gave permission, right? Said, I want to go and visit the New Orleans Saints when it came to the potential of him being traded before that February 15th deadline. So that's number one, right? The New Orleans Saints simply wanted Derek Carr, so them acting too fast in order to get Derek Carr can't be a thing, because that's who they wanted. The second piece is, just like we spoke about in yesterday's episode, which you didn't catch it, it's a lot of fun. Just like we spoke about in yesterday's episode when we were saying why the Atlanta Falcons and Carolina Panthers maybe backed off from the Lamar Jackson trade thing. They both basically came out and said, hey, along with several other teams, never seen anything like this in the NFL before, several other teams saying, we're not really interested, we're not going to pursue Lamar Jackson. Why? Well, one of the easiest reasons to see why is, why would you, as the New Orleans Saints, want to pass on getting Derek Carr one in the hand versus going out and negotiating a contract that another team can just match? So you're just doing the other team's job for them, two in the bush, right? So yeah, maybe you could have negotiated a contract with Lamar Jackson, but you would have had to have submitted an offer sheet to him because of the way that the non-exclusive franchise tag works, which is what the Baltimore Ravens put on Lamar Jackson going into this week. You could go out there and negotiate a contract with him, do all this stuff. He has no agent, so you're negotiating kind of directly with him and family. It gets really uncomfortable, stuff like that. You're saying, we value you this much because of your recent injury history, your play style, being ill, like all these other things. And then he's saying, no, I want this, right? And standing and holding his ground, which great. Like, do your thing, dude. But like, why would the New Orleans Saints want to facilitate and give all those resources just to basically facilitate a contract for another team to say, all right, cool, that's your market, we'll match it? Because that's effectively what the Baltimore Ravens are doing here. They're saying, okay, we want you to be able to show us that your market is what you think it is, but we're trying to show you that your market is what we think it is. And because you don't have an agent to go out there and figure out all that stuff for you because you can't go and talk to other teams, here's your chance to go and talk to other teams, figure out what your market is, and we'll see you in, just a little bit, basically. So I could easily see the New Orleans Saints not wanting to be a part of it because of that. Here's the third thing, and this is a big one. The New Orleans Saints, and along with no other team in the NFL, want to give a quarterback a fully guaranteed contract. First of all, it doesn't work with what the New Orleans Saints' usual pushing money down the road model is, right? You have to have some of that non-guaranteed money to be able to borrow from, push, all the other things that you can do with that, convert, yada, yada. So when the New Orleans Saints do that, basically what they're telling somebody like Derek Carr is, hey, it's a $150 million contract. We're going to guarantee $100 million of it. But if you stick around with us, we'll restructure this portion of your base salary in year 3. Then all of a sudden you're walking away with $120 million guaranteed before it's all said and done. You can create new money, new guaranteed money every time that you or convert some of that base salary to signing bonus, push it down the road, all those other things. So it also kind of becomes a bargaining chip. Like, we'll actually end up guaranteeing you more money the longer you're around. You can't do that with a fully guaranteed contract. You're already at 10. If you're down at 8, you can at least get to 9, 10. But if you're at 10, you're at 10. There's nothing you can do from that point forward. And so working the cap, doing everything that it is, thinking that Kai Harley and the New Orleans Saints and Mickey Loomis are going to say, yeah, here's a $250 million contract over 5 years, fully guaranteed, knowing how the New Orleans Saints work that salary cap? Absolutely no way. The other piece that's a part of that, still here on point 3, is that if you're the second team in the NFL, remember, Deshaun Watson got a fully guaranteed contract last year. But right now, that contract is an outlier. If you're the team that gives that gives Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed contract, that idea of quarterbacks getting fully guaranteed contracts goes from being an outlier to being a precedent. You really want to be the NFL team that establishes the precedent of fully guaranteed quarterback contracts? I don't think so. I don't think you want that at all. So there's also that part. Here's the last little piece of information for you to know. And this is something to just keep in mind when it comes to the non-exclusive franchise tag. Because some folks might be thinking, well, this must happen all the time. Somebody gets a non-exclusive franchise tag, somebody else, another team negotiates, and very often that other team will get that player. That's actually not true. Adam Schefter put this out, and this actually came thanks to Evan Kaplan over at ESPN Stats and Info. In 30 years of free agency, there has been one single player that has been given the non-exclusive franchise tag by a team, had an offer sheet submitted by another team, and that player, in one occasion, has actually ended up on the other team. Every single other time that the non-exclusive franchise tag has been used, that player ends up on his original team. So there's no reason to expect that that's going to change with one of today's best quarterbacks in the NFL, especially understanding that 2 first-round picks is all Baltimore can possibly get in return for letting him sign elsewhere. The New Orleans Saints didn't act too quickly and miss out on Lamar Jackson. What they basically did was kept themselves out of trouble. Coming up next, one of Derek Carr's favorite targets when he was in Las Vegas was Darren Waller. The New Orleans Saints have Juwan Johnson, but what if they can add another big-bodied, pass-catching threat at tight end? I'll tell you exactly who they can pursue in this year's NFL draft. Got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by your friends over at FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL and an official sportsbook partner as well of the NBA. The NFL season may be over, but the NBA is in full swing. So if you want to get in on all of that action, you don't want to miss out on your opportunity to get started with FanDuel, especially if you've never been there before, because right now, first-time users will get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets that come back if your first bet doesn't win. And maybe you don't want to get in on the NBA. That's okay. You can bet for your New Orleans Saints even though the season's over. NFL futures have the New Orleans Saints favored plus 115 The next best odds are the Carolina Panthers plus 270 to win the NFC South in 2023, 2024. And they're also tied for fourth in fourth best odds at plus 1100 to win the NFC Conference as a whole, tied with the Detroit Lions behind only the San Francisco 49ers, Philadelphia Eagles, and Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, let me get all my words right. So if you want to go and check them out today, don't miss out on your chance for your no sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets. Just head over to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. FanDuel, make every moment count with FanDuel Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints have their quarterback, and there are some great draft prospects in this year's draft that would maybe help Derek Carr feel right at home. We went in through some of the free agents from Las Vegas that the New Orleans Saints could potentially court, or that Derek Carr could potentially court. There's also the chance that they could pull off a trade for a guy like Hunter Renfrow, for instance, see what happens with Darren Waller. But what if a guy like Darren Waller in particular is important to Derek Carr, but the Saints don't want to pull off a trade for him and instead want to grab a rookie on a cost-controlled deal, give him a little bit of time to develop behind Bijan Robinson? Well, there's a perfect fit in this year's NFL draft for exactly that. So look back to the 2019-2020 season. Derek Carr was extremely successful in targeting Darren Waller. Two straight 1,000 yard seasons, 12 combined touchdowns over those 2 years. But then as Darren Waller's injury started to set in and his production dropped, you also started watching Derek Carr's interceptions go up, 14 interceptions in each of the last 2 years. So having that big body tight end that can patrol the middle of the field, but is also super athletic and can do a lot of other things for you as well. We know how talented Darren Waller was those couple of years and still is, honestly, at 6'6", 250 pounds. There's actually a guy that has a pretty similar skill set in this year's draft, and that's Georgia tight end Darnell Washington. Now, investing a first-round pick in a tight end is always a little bit risky. Usually you want to invest a first-round pick in a player that's going to have an immediate impact for you their first year. Chris Olave, Trevor Penning would have been on that list had he not had the injury to his foot, for instance, things like that. Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk, those are the types of players that you really want to land in the first round. Tight end is maybe one of the hardest, if not the hardest positions to transition to from college to the pros because the responsibilities are massively different, like mad different. But when you have somebody that has the raw size and athleticism of a guy like Darnell Washington, it might be worth it. Or if he's still there at 40 in the second round, then that's an absolute easy pick. You get a nice impact, immediate impact guy in the first round. We'll be discussing who that could be here as we wrap up the show here in just a little bit. But at 6'7", 264 pounds, Darren Waller's 40 time, not as impressive. Darnell Washington's 40 time, not as impressive as Darren Waller's. Waller's was 4.47. Washington's was an unofficial 4.64, according to the NFL website. But his 10-yard split was really impressive, which is the time of the first 10 yards of your 40-yard dash. It was 1.57. That was tied for second best amongst the position in 2023. And his 20-yard shuttle, otherwise called short shuttle, which is a pretty good measure of your ability to change directions, your quickness in confined areas, short spaces, things like that, was one of the best, or was the best posted at his position since 2012, a 4.08. Remember, a really good 40 time is like 3.81. So you're talking about, what, 2.5, hundredths of a second off here? Not a big deal. So you see the athleticism, you know that he's got the size at 6'7", 264. He hasn't been overly utilized in that Georgia offense because of what they were able to do, scheming up those wide receivers. Tom Munkin doing a wonderful job with all of that. But over the course of the past 2 years, he's had a very nice completion percentage of 69%, and has been one of those guys that has been a go-to in key moments in his offense. So yes, you have Bijan Robinson, and well, you don't yet, but you probably will, right? He's a restricted free agent, so all I have to do is slap a tender on him. And much like that non-exclusive franchise tag that we just mentioned, many times when you slap an RFA tender on a player, they don't end up with another team. They end up with the original team. So you can end up keeping Bijan Robinson and then figuring out where Darnell Washington can fit for you immediately and hopefully see him develop as a pass catcher as quickly as possible, which would also free up Adam Troutman, by the way, to not have to be a guy with one role, either be a blocker or be a pass catcher. He can be a little bit of an all-around guy. Figure out where he's going to be most impactful for you, because he's kind of getting to that point where he's got to prove it, right? That's kind of where Adam Troutman is at this point. And for him, he gets a little bit of extra time with that as a guy that came in on a COVID year, didn't get really like a training camp or anything to really get settled or anything like that. So when I look at the Saints' ability to be able to go out there and grab a guy that can be a Darren Waller type, he absolutely checks those boxes, especially because of his size. Again, he doesn't have the long speed of a 4.47, but his agility, his quickness, his balance, all the other things that he brings to the table, as well as some pretty good hands as well, some safe hands, would maybe give you somebody that can prowl the middle of the field, somebody that can take up space in those confined areas, get up over the top of defenders, whether they be linebackers or smaller safeties, outmuscle some of those guys as well, especially at 264 pounds, and be somebody that gives, in addition to Juwan Johnson and hopefully Michael Thomas as well, somebody that gives Derek Carr one of those closer to the line of scrimmage targets in the short and intermediate area. As we broke down, that's a very important area for Derek Carr in yesterday's episode. If you didn't catch that, make sure you go and check it out. That gives you somebody that can keep those interception numbers down, that can keep the decision-making nice and simple, that can keep the offense clearly focused on how it wants to run and who it wants to run through, increasing the amount of potential contributing factors on the offense, all of that. So I am all for it. Or Darnell Washington, particularly in the second round. If you can get him at 40 and get another playmaker at 29, or maybe start to shore up that defensive line on 29, an immediate impact player, then that's a good spot to get that done. You can do that and still fall back and get our Darnell Washington. Coming up next, what if the New Orleans Saints wanted to find another player, much like Josh Jacobs, who Derek Carr is very, very familiar with and was very, very comfortable with in Las Vegas, where there's one running back that checks just about every box out there and another that can be found a little bit later. Got two examples for you for that one as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a perfect draft fit for the New Orleans Saints to add to their backfield in order to better support Derek Carr, especially with Alvin Kamara, the New Orleans Saints star running back, set to face his trial for all of the offseason things, or really offseason things that happened 2 off seasons ago, that he's been dealing with that sort of continued trial over and over again. That is now set for July 31st. So there's a chance that Alvin Kamara misses at least 6 games, according to the NFL's Code of Conduct policy in 2023. So finding a running back, investing in running back, even with Alvin Kamara, very important, because you want to find somebody in concert. The only other running back besides Kamara on the roster is Benjamin. So here's why the New Orleans Saints should view Texas running back Bijan Robinson as a can't-miss prospect. Now, y'all know I have my reservations around investing a first-round pick in a running back, wear and tear, injuries, things like that. But if there's anyone in this draft or anyone in the recent drafts to invest a first-round pick in, it's Bijan Robinson. Or, let's get crazy, the New Orleans Saints finally trade back out of round 1, pick up an early round 2 where they can get guys like Bijan Robinson and Darnell Washington and pick up additional picks. The Saints haven't traded back since 2007. Very unlikely that they do that, but hey, trends are made to be broken. And that's another reason why I should acknowledge that Bijan Robinson is worth a first-round pick if the New Orleans Saints and NFL teams believe that he's worth a first-round pick, because trends are meant to be broken. Here's why I like Bijan Robinson, though, regardless of where he's selected, right? Regardless of how I feel about first-round pick, not, whatever. He is in my opinion, and actually, I'm not even saying my opinion, the numbers back it up too. Bijan Robinson is a more athletic version of Josh Jacobs. Let me explain what I mean by more athletic, okay? They're similar in terms of size. Josh Jacobs was at 5'10 coming into the combine. Bijan Robinson comes in at 5'11. Josh Jacobs was 220 at the combine. Bijan Robinson, 215. Really, really similar in terms of size. Very similar in terms of skill set as well. Run between the tackles. Can also get to the edge. Can be one of those one-cut guys, but isn't one of those guys that only runs around to the edge like Saquon Barkley was, which was the big question about him coming out of Penn State and getting into the NFL. He proved everybody wrong. Again, trends meant to be broken. So Bijan doesn't have that one note part of his offense. He's also a good pass catcher, fantastic pass catcher. Can get some stuff done after the run as well because of his ability as a running back and his vision. And is a pretty solid pass blocker as well, something that he prides himself on, much like Josh Jacobs. So I look at them as being similar style players with similar enough skill sets that Derek Carr would be comfortable utilizing a Bijan Robinson. Then you look at the athletic traits. 40-yard dash, okay? A good 40-yard dash in the NFL today is in the 4.4s, right? Anywhere in the 4.4s, pretty good. You're in the 4.3s, you're extremely fast. You're in the 4.2s, you're amazing. You're in 4.5s, you're like moderate speed. But 4.4 is good. Josh Jacobs came into the NFL with a 4.64 40. 4.64, and he's still outrunning people because game speed translates differently than just running in a straight line for 40 yards. Bijan Robinson's was 4.46, so quite a bit faster. Vertical, 35 inches for Josh Jacobs, 37 inches for Bijan Robinson. Broad jump, Bijan Robinson had it beat by an entire foot. So you see the explosive stuff like the verticals, the broad jumps, way above, or at least well above Josh Jacobs. Speed, well above Josh Jacobs. But utility and ability and usability, like that, I'm on a rhyming kick today. Very similar. So regardless of where he's drafted, right? Regardless of where he's drafted, if the Saints wanted to bring somebody in that has a similar fit and similar skill set to Josh Jacobs to feel familiar for Derek Carr, especially if he's going to be without Alvin Kamara for a large chunk of the season, presumably and potentially, Bijan Robinson's a shoo-in, right? He's an absolute guy that you can pick there. Now, I'll also say this. It's not limited to Bijan Robinson. Oh, we got a little bit of Lanyap for you. I'm not giving you just two. Let me give you one more. And you know I'm going to say it. Say it with me. 1, 2, 3. Tulane running back Tyjae Spears. Yeah, be mad if you want to be mad. Be glad if you want to be glad. Totally fine. But let me explain myself. Give me a chance to explain myself. Doesn't have the same type of weight distribution as Josh Jacobs. 201 pounds to Josh Jacobs, 220 coming into the NFL. Similar height. We're talking 5'10" for Josh Jacobs, 5'9.5" for Tyjae Spears. And then you have the vertical and the explosive categories. Much like Bijan Robinson, Tyjae Spears is considerably more explosive. 35-inch vertical for Josh Jacobs versus 39 for Tyjae Spears. And then again, an entire foot difference when it comes to the broad jump, which is that one to where they just jump without a running start and go forward, broad jump, see how far they can get. Measures how explosive you are in your lower body. Now, Tyjae did not run the 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine. The report, and I can tell you from what I've heard, Tyjae Spears will run or is expected to run the 40-yard dash at his pro day here in New Orleans at Tulane on the 16th of March. I'll be there for that. I'll bring you the whole report from it. For me, Tyjae Spears is one of those guys that's similar. One cut, can run between the tackles, but isn't limited or one note. He can get around the edge. He can catch. Obviously, he's a fantastic pass catcher, and what he can do with the ball in his hands has been outstanding. Led the group of 5, but was also tied or was also within the top 5 when it comes to yards after contact. One of the things that made Josh Jacobs so special coming out of Alabama was his ability to break tackles and pick up yards after contact. Tyjae Spears, same guy, similar guy. So again, a similar skill set to where, let's say the New Orleans Saints decide that they're all in on Tyjae Spears, the local guy, right? They got a lot of time to visit with him here over the offseason. He's here in town. Let's say they're all in on him. They like him in the 3rd round. Let's say that they have a good feeling about Darnell Washington or one of the other magnificent tight ends in this year's class, like one of the best tight end classes we've ever seen, right? Could be any of the other guys too. It could be Luke Musgrave out of, I can't remember off the top of my head if it's Oklahoma State or Oregon State. I'll correct that here in a second. But out of all of those guys, let's say you like one of those tight ends in the 2nd round, you like Tyjae in the 3rd round. Luke Musgrave, by the way, Oregon State, my apologies. Yikes. And then in the 1st round, you go and you grab yourself a Tyjae Spears or a Mazi Smith out of Michigan. Tyjae Spears, of course, the small, compact, but very disruptive interior pass rusher out of Pittsburgh. Or you go with the big run stopper that's also very disruptive as a pass rusher in Mazi Smith out of Michigan, right? You load up that defensive line first, find your immediate impact player there. You're in a pretty good shape, right? Like if you start off your draft with Mazi Smith or Tyjae Spears with Darnell Washington or one of the other top, let's say 3 or 4 tight ends in this year's class in the second round at pick 40, and then cap that off in terms of your day 1, day 2 selections with Tyjae Spears in the third round, that's pretty good. Probably leaves you behind on Hendon Hooker, but you have a starting quarterback now. You can come back around a quarterback in 2024 and then draft somebody to be behind Derek Carr that year. Risky, but you can do it. So to me, that's a great way to go. And that's an easy way for you to find ways to get players that Derek Carr will feel comfortable with and will feel familiar to him, even though they're of status that you're not going to be able to get from Las Vegas. Drafting guys that fit the mold. So just think about this with me as we wrap up. Derek Carr is your quarterback. Let's say they get Michael Thomas back. They've got Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. Maybe they draft somebody later on in the draft, like a Xavier Hutchinson, or they bring somebody in from like Mac Hollins, or maybe they pull off a trade for Hunter Renfrow or something like that. You know what I mean? So you get that other possession guy, but then you've got Michael Thomas, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed. You get Juwan Johnson. Let's just say Darnell Washington. Let's say that you don't go for Bijan Robinson in the first round, but you have Alvin Kamara coming back eventually. You add Alexander Madison as your power running back in this year's class, but you draft Tyjae Spears and you've got Eno Benjamin in there. That's a pretty darn good offense of quarterback and skill position players. Still got to shore up the offensive line, depth, all that. Maybe replace left guard, see what they do. But pretty darn good. Coming up tomorrow, it's In Case You Missed It, getting you caught up on everything that you need to know around your New Orleans Saints. We'll do that toward the end of the episode. But before we do that in tomorrow's episode, I want to just sort of go over the timeline. Like Fridays are all about getting you caught up. Let's go over the timeline of how everything broke down between the New Orleans Saints, or worked out between the New Orleans Saints and Derek Carr, how they got it done, and why you should be happy about it. Because going down the road on free agents hasn't always worked out and turned into them actually signing them in the past. This is a big change for the New Orleans Saints. We'll discuss that and break it all down in tomorrow's episode of Locked On Saints. Appreciate you, as always, for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day. Don't forget, for your second listen today, go check out Locked On NFL Draft. You think I know my draft guys? Damian Parson, Keith Sanchez make me look like a toddler in this field. Go and check them out. Biggest names, sleepers, hidden gems that can change your favorite franchise, the New Orleans Saints, and more around all of it. Don't get left behind not knowing anybody's name in the draft. These guys have you covered. Find it wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks as always, making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. You need anything else around your New Orleans Saints, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation, I'll holla at you.